Well, I'll just start by saying thank you for everybody for being here. It is a public meeting. However, there's no action being requested, simply just a presentation and time for Q&A at the end to give Travis any direction he might need. Thank you, Your Honor, Donarski, for being here today as well. And I'll just turn it over to Travis.
Hello. So my name is Travis Johnson. I don't believe I've met everybody on the City Commission yet. I know I've met most of them. But basically, just a little background on myself. Before this position, which I started January 20th, I previously worked for the City of Valley City for a year and a half as a police officer. I commissioned in the North Dakota Army National Guard 2017 after I graduated from North Dakota State University. And basically, I just kind of thought it'd be a good idea to share a little bit about code enforcement and exactly kind of what it is and maybe how I can get some help here moving forward and some opinions. Until I really started this position, I don't know that I could have really ever told you what code enforcement truly was or what it all entailed. I guess as far as any questions, I mean, feel free to speak up if you have anything during the presentation. I'll try and keep it fairly brief, but otherwise, feel free to ask questions at the end, and we will go from there. Okay, so we'll just go over the agenda quick here. So basically, I'm going to go over the code enforcement data, which is basically just going to be me showing you the number of complaints that I've received or that this area has received, along with just kind of the amount of follow-up that's been done on all the issues and all the complaints throughout this year. And then we'll move into just basically what is code enforcement. And then from there, we will move into, I'll give you a couple of examples of how it kind of comes to me, and I'll show you the most common ones. I'll give you an example of how I would maybe go about a tall grass and weeds complaint, how I might go across a vehicle parking on grass complaint. And then I'm going to go over a couple less obvious issues that maybe aren't so easy to determine right off the bat. And then I'm going to kind of explain our most common violations that I've seen throughout the city of West Fargo throughout this past year, followed by just things to consider with violations and the property owners that may be receiving these issues or these letters that I'm going to be sending them, because it's usually not all black and white. There's a whole lot of gray and a lot of different things to kind of take into consideration. And then basically I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I spend my day, whether that's eating donuts or actually getting out working. Hint, it's not the donuts part. Current issues with code enforcement. Basically, a lot of that's just going to be some of the problems that come with trying to enforce some of these issues. And then we'll move into what the goal of code enforcement is in West Fargo. And I think that slide is going to be kind of a lot on me getting opinions from each and every one of you just to see what your thoughts are on the matter. And then after that, we will move into the public nuisance civil remedy, something that we do not use hardly ever, but something that maybe is worth considering as we move forward, depending on your thoughts. And then we'll end it with just how to better enforce some issues or some thoughts that maybe we can all come up with together, and then some open discussion here. So these are the number of complaints that we have received throughout the year. Jumping right down to total complaints for the year, I should say this ended as of December 9th of last week was what I considered, because I had training on Thursday and Friday, so I wasn't able to be in the office to take any new ones. So right now 413 is the total as of December 9th. Some things to point out again are the January 20th starting point that I had. So obviously I didn't get that full month in January to take complaints, but we were still able to get quite a few based on snow. And basically those first few months were fairly mellow. It was a lot of me trying to still get used to things and figuring out how I was going to go forward with them. And otherwise, most of the complaints were snow related. Once you get into that March and April timeframe, it slowed down again because we had the pandemic start and we started working from home. And, I think people were kind of not really, code enforcement was not their number one priority as far as making complaints. Then once you move into May and you kind of keep going through August, that's when the complaints start to skyrocket. And a lot of that is related to a couple of things. One being tall grass and weeds, a lot of that being vacant lots. And then another point was just a lot of people were at home a lot more, and they had a lot more, I don't know, things that they noticed by sitting at home, if that's where they ended up working was from home. Because a lot of people would actually start out their complaint by saying, maybe it's just me because I'm working from home. So between the grass and those type of issues, I mean, we started to see the summer ended up being pretty busy. It started to slow down a little bit again in August. A lot of that was because by that point, I knew some of the developers and some of the people in those developments that were maybe causing a lot of the tall grass issues. So I started to do things proactively. And I was able to get contact numbers. So rather than go the complaint route or go the sending a violation letter route, I was able to just simply call out of these folks and take care of it before it ended up being a problem. And then once you move into September, October, November, it starts to slow down a little bit. But the only thing with the slowdown is that the cases that do pop up or the complaints that do pop up are usually related to issues that take a little bit longer, such as parking on grass or things within maybe the planning ordinance or junk, things that take longer to enforce versus grass or snow on a sidewalk. Those can be settled within a week. But on the right side, though, you'll see kind of the complaints by category. I won't go into it too much because we'll go over the most common violations slide. But just something to note that's just how I currently have it broken down as far as complaint categories. That's how I intend to go with. I intend to go with that moving into 2021 as well. Just because I think it kind of gives us a good overview of where the time is getting spent in this department. And obviously, the other category, that would be the one where I'd like to maybe try and see if I can't split that down anymore. But a lot of times there are some random complaints that pop up that just simply don't fit any category. But as you'll see a higher number for your snow related ones, parking issues, and then of course, weeds and tall grass being the highest. Moving into more data, this is just the follow-up or re-inspection is what maybe the more common term that you might be thinking of. Looking down at that 3478 as far as the total follow-up for this year, that's not something that I would consider a big deal because what follow-up for me is it can be anything from just simply driving by and visually confirming that something has or has not changed. That can count as a follow-up, as well as a 30 or 40 minute follow-up phone call or a trip out there to work with somebody on something. I mean, it can range, and it's literally everything to do with a property. Anytime that I do any kind of follow-up, whether it be a phone call, visually confirming, or whatever it might be, I generally will put a note into the case management system for that address, and that way it's all noted. Basically, I do a lot of follow-up. I do a lot of follow-up because while there is the initial inspection and while there is a re-inspection at the very end, because everything has a final compliance date. Like example, grass, I do the initial inspection to confirm that there's a violation, and then there's a final compliance date that says if it is not fixed by that point, we will have a contractor come and mow it. I generally do and follow up in between those points, because whether or not somebody changes something or does slightly change something during that time period can kind of tell me how I can maybe help them not reach that final compliance state and need to get abated. I guess my goal is to try and help out people as much as possible. So if I can try and work with people throughout that time period to avoid them getting in trouble, that's what I'm going to do. So again, it's the amount of follow-up is pretty much directly correlated with the amount of complaints. And you'll see that as in the weeds and tall grass, just like it had the most complaints, it had the most follow-up that was with it, along with your parking issues, snow-related issues, and then illegal storage of junk, and then everything else. And again, we'll probably hit some more on that here moving forward. What is code enforcement? Basically, I perform inspections considering violations of local ordinances and codes relating to nuisances and dangerous buildings and various other codes. It is basically, as of right now, it is often driven by a complaint. And then from there, based on when I get that complaint, I will inspect and confirm the violation. And there will be more on that to follow later, because that's going to be a big part of the getting a feedback from each and every one of you. Is complaint the way to go, or is proactivity the way to go? From there, basically I would notify the property owner of any violation that may be present through a mail, which would be a violation letter, such as the one that you'll see on your screen right now, or it could be phone if I have a phone number. But a lot of times the phone number is usually if I'm dealing with a contractor or a business, or it could be a door hanger. Door hangers being relatively new, and that will likely be a little bit higher here moving forward with snow removal. Otherwise, again, reinspection occurs after a designated period of time based on what the city ordinances allow me to, or what is reasonable for a person to fix that issue. And then it ends with abatement if the problem is not fixed. Abatement is currently only allowed for snow removal on sidewalks and grass and weeds that are too tall. Otherwise, all other violations that I deal with are generally getting sent to the city attorney. And then from there, whether or not they will get a fine or whatever it might be, that's to be determined. So an example of how this looks here, we'll go with the tall grass and weeds complaint. So let's just say we get a call from John Smith. I received on a Monday, and he states that 1234 Robert Lane West is a vacant lot with tall grass and weeds. And basically, pending caseload or administrative actions that I have on my plate, I will go out to that property that might be in violation, and then I confirm whether it is or not. And then I'll take a photo, so that way I can document that. That way, if somebody decides to argue later on the road that they weren't, in violation, then I can tell them that I have a photo that tells otherwise. So once I get back to the office, I get photos and documentation. I upload that into my computer, and then from there, I put it into the case management system under that address. And then from there, I create a violation letter, and I make it for the property owner, and I make it specific to their violation, and I'll bring it to the post office, or I'll have it get picked up by the postal service here from City Hall by the end of the day. A couple things to note are, for me, I generally go out every morning, and I will go through my entire list of cases or active addresses that I need to, and I'll generally drive by and follow up as I need to. And then in the afternoon, I'll generally go out once again, but that'll be for any new complaints that pop up throughout that day, or it'll be for just maybe things that require some more specialized attention, or that things that I just put on my schedule for that day. Our case management system is currently called MyGov, and MyGov does create violation letters for the addresses, or at least that's how it started when I started. That's what Pierre, the previous code enforcement officer, used. I no longer use the letters made through the case management system. I have created templates for each common violation, and from there it allows me to fill in certain information that's specific to the property owner, kind of makes them feel like maybe they can actually reach out to us a little bit more, trying to avoid it sounding scary. Because what you might have saw on I had a violation letter example popped up on the previous slides. And basically, I tried to copy a little bit of what Fargo Cast Public Health uses, because I felt that it gave the best description. I thought it just covered everything to make people understand it the best. So continuing on the tall grass and weeds complaint, basically the property owner has 7 days to mow or self-abate their own property. So mowing that grass if it's too tall, and if there is no change in the violation after the end of that 7th day, I will go out the day after the final compliance date, because I have to allow them their entire day before. And if they still have not mowed the grass at that point in time on that 8th day, at that point, I will send the address or a list of addresses to our contractor, and they will basically go out and take care of it themselves. And then what we will do after that is, after we hire the contractor and they complete the work, they let us know, and the property owner is charged the fee for the service. And then they are also going to be charged a $75 administrative fee to cover some of the time put into it, and basically promote that they shouldn't allow that to happen. Things to note are that we did an RFP for a contractor for snow removal, and we just recently accepted one of those bids. And so it'll be interesting. So now we have a consistent fee schedule in place with this company, and everything should go more smoothly versus before. We were still new with this whole thing, so we were kind of trying out contractors as we went. So another example here is the parking on improved surfaces. This falls under the planning chapter number 4, and it's basically stating that vehicles, trailers, campers, boats, they are not supposed to be parked on grass or an unimproved surface. It needs to be parked on concrete or asphalt. There are probably only a few special exceptions where that might not be the case. So the complaint, let's just say, is from a Randy Smith, and it's through email. It's received on a Monday regarding a red SUV parked on the east side of a home. Now, I feel like I probably should have picked a different photo, because from here, this person could very well be parked on a driveway because it's kind of far away. But I also didn't want to kind of give any specific property in West Fargo away just for privacy matters. I just happen to be familiar with that area, and I know that it's parked on grass. So due to a busy schedule, maybe I can't make it out till that next day. But when I do, I confirm the violation it can't be parked on grass. So I take photos and I document the notes on it, kind of, hey, maybe there's a license plate that I can specifically put down on that vehicle, just in case any issues or arguments come up later on down the road. And then again, I go back to the office and I'll add photos and notes to the computer and case management system, generate the letter, prepare for the property owner. With this issue, the property owners will receive 30-day compliance periods based on what the planning ordinance allows me to. 4-570 is the violation or punishment section of the planning chapter. and it says that we shall allow no less than 30 days for a compliance period before we can do any further actions, such as sending it to the city attorney. So during that 30-day time period, I will check it at least 2 to 5 times throughout that 30-day period, especially if no contact has been made over the phone. I usually like it if the property owners will give me a call, maybe let me know that they've at least acknowledged that they've received the letter, that they have a plan in place, because not everybody does. It basically helps me know how I should work with them or know what to expect, because if nobody's contacted me and nothing has changed, then I am going to try and find other routes, whether I try to knock on their door, see if I can speak to them in person or whatever it might be, because it's not efficient if we have to send it to the city attorney and have it go through a drawn out process. So generally, I consider setting a second notice of violation halfway through that compliance period if nothing's changed. I do that on almost anything that's a 30-day compliance period, because if I haven't heard any contact from anybody, sending that second violation letter just makes me feel more comfortable that maybe there's a better chance that they'll receive it and I can at least acknowledge it, whether they want to fix it or not. So basically I'll send a second letter halfway through. If no movement has been made or no contact has been attempted by the property owner after that 30-day period of time, by rule, we can send it to the city attorney for consideration of administrative actions. And if compliance is reached, then we'll just document that with a photo. We'll want to take a photo that there isn't a vehicle there, so if anything pops up later down the road, we can see both sides of it. And then we'll close that case for future documentation. So looking at that violation letter on the screen, you'll see I have a spot where I put the property owner and I put their address, but it also notes like the date of the complaint, if there was a complaint on it, the location of the property in violation, because sometimes property owners don't live at the address in violation. And then it kind of has the city of West Fargo recorded property owner that we get out the assessor's the GIS map for the city. I give them a required action. So in this case, it would be move or remove vehicle to appropriate location by 30 days from July 20th, so probably August 20th. And then I do a description of that property specifically with their violation. And then each of them has an ordinance description, so that way they at least have an idea of where this is coming from, that we're not just making it up. And then the administrative action part is kind of telling them what the punishment could be if they do not fix that. And it seems like it could be harsh, like if you've never gotten a violation for this before, or you don't even know what the city ordinance is, it could seem a little scary seeing something that says you could be sent to city attorney after a certain period of time. But the problem is if we do not put that on the violation letter, we're not letting them know that there could actually be a punishment for it. So if someday down the road we actually do decide to move forward on it, well, then they can argue that they had no idea that that was the case. So moving forward, some of the less obvious issues that kind of pop up, I kind of picked 2 examples that I thought were interesting throughout this year that really made me think a little bit. So I received a complaint from a neighbor, or from an individual whose neighbor was parking their SUV on the grass, but the thing is they generally move it, whether it be for work, errands, etc. And that was the issue, was because when I went to inspect it the first time, it was not there. And so throughout more conversations, it was basically determined that the vehicle doesn't just sit there for a long period of time. And the complainant wanted me to send a violation letter regarding this ordinance because vehicles can't be parked on the grass. The issue with that is the violation requires a minimum of a 30-day notice. But that 30-day notice, if I see a vehicle parked on the grass, is for that time period that that vehicle's parked in the grass. The second it moves onto the street or anything else, that clock restarts if it goes back on the grass. And that was the issue in this case was, yeah, it was in violation, but we have to allow that 30-day period per the ordinance, and therefore it's this person is reaching compliance each time. So the complainant was naturally very upset because we wouldn't do anything, and then I totally understood. I didn't disagree with them that it was kind of frustrating, but at the same time, I can't just make something up for this person just because somebody's upset. And the only possibility other than that ordinance would be to utilize something under a boulevard's violation, which is basically saying you can't drive on a boulevard. But the problem is, who does that? You know, does the police department issue a citation on that? Because generally they're probably supposed to see the violation actually occur or have valid proof that the person drove over the boulevard to get to their point. Or do I do it? I don't have the ability to write citations at this point in time. Is it even citation worthy? Is it even court worthy? Just things to think about. So another less obvious issue is a complaint of a broken fence that I received. It was separating an apartment buildings, garages, and then a block of single family homes. In most cases, or at least in many cases, fences are generally required between apartment buildings and residential homes to separate them. Now, the complainant did state that the property company repaired it several years ago, which is why he was wondering why they weren't wanting to fix it now, because he had reached out to them first. The issue is that the apartment was built before that rule was required, and there was no documentation through covenants or anything really showing differently. I remember working with Tim in the planning department on this matter, and we try to look at whatever we could. We try to look back on old files, and there was really nothing that would have legally held anyone to fixing that. And that includes the property management company or the apartment owner. But what ended up being the case was the property manager for that apartment there now was different than the property manager that repaired the fence several years ago. And what ended up being the case was that that property owner or property manager from a while ago likely fixed that fence, either not knowing that there was not a rule that was, saying that he had to do it, or he just plain didn't, was willing to do it out of his own free will. This current property management company was not willing to do it out of their own free will because it would have been a lot of money. But basically what ended up happening out of that case was the complainant was told that we can't legally back forcing the apartment to fix the fence. And in that case, it becomes more of a civil issue between the two. So moving on to our most common violations, if you look on the left there, it's basically the snow on sidewalk in the winter time is your big one. Right now, we've been fortunate, knock on wood, that we haven't had really any snow. We got a little dusting here this weekend, but it's nothing major. Last year was a lot of snow. And between the turnover between me and the previous code enforcement individuals, there was a lot of frustration with citizens and not keeping up. And hopefully now we'll move forward a lot smoother with that, with me here full time and having a system down and having a contractor in place. Tall grass and weeds, yeah, in the summer that was huge. I remember coming back from military leave, and I remember how, the days were full. I think I spent most of the days out in the car trying to drive around and do the follow-up on it. And then essentially I came back and was just doing documentation till the end of the day, and then making sure that letters got out in timely manners and everything. It did get a little bit smoother as I got more contact information for property owners or contractors or construction companies, whatever it might be. And noxious weeds, they fall under the tall grass and weeds. A lot of times, if there's tall grass and weeds, you can probably find some noxious weeds that need to be taken care of. And then parking vehicles or trailers or whatever it might be on unimproved surfaces. If we were to do something like that proactively versus reactively, I could probably find hundreds of violations under that matter itself. But it's still been a pretty popular complaint without doing it proactively, but that is probably one of our most common violations. Illegal storage of junk. This kind of covers a wide variety of issues. And a lot of times it's kind of a generalized one, and it can kind of offend some people, because some people have like older vehicles that they're trying to fix up, old hot rods or whatever it might be. And so they don't have current registration. They don't look like they can run. So the idea behind it is great, but when you send them a letter telling them that their vehicle's junk, it can be tough, because they don't necessarily like their vehicle being called junk, but technically under the city ordinance, under the definition of junk automobile, it falls under that. So that's one of our most common ones as well. Also one of the harder ones to kind of enforce. So moving forward, things to consider with the violation, and things that questions that I think about as I've been doing this more and more. Has this property been in violation before or recently? A lot of times there have been properties so far this year that have been in violation multiple times, or there's been a couple. I think I've had one property that's had the same violation 6 or 7 times this summer alone. And then, because if they've done it multiple times, then there's a good chance that I found that they may do it again. So I try to be more proactive with those individuals if I can be, or if I am able to get a phone number, I like to be able to just kind of reach out to them and see how we can help them out a little bit more. Another question is, was the ordinance in place when the property was built? That fence one being an example, or fencing, it seems to be a common one with this matter, as well as enclosures around dumpsters. A lot of apartment buildings maybe don't have dumpster enclosures, and that tends to be associated with when the ordinance was put in place. The life situation of the property owner. Are they older? Are they on vacation, struggling to get by? A lot of these ones that maybe are lasting a little bit longer, or I can't seem to get rid of, they tend to be associated with people with lower incomes. And, it's tough because, they can't afford storage, maybe if it's something to do with parking, or they have a junk vehicle or junk on their property and they can't clean it up. You don't want to maybe treat anybody more special than another person, but at the same time, you kind of feel the pain of some of these people, and you want to help them out as much as possible if you can. Obviously, if they're on vacation, ideally a person will have a plan in place. If it's like the winter or the summer, that they would have somebody mowing or doing their shoveling for them, but that's not always the case. And another question would be, how much would it cost if we, the city, had to abate their property or violation? Would the minimum timeline be reasonable for them given their circumstance? And are they just not aware of the ordinance for that matter? A lot of people don't know some of these ordinances. I mean, I guess I don't know, even just all of you that are on this meeting today. I mean, there's probably been some ordinances that unless you were in this position, maybe we wouldn't know about it. And so that's why, those are things that we have to maybe look forward to as I get more experience in this field, is maybe we can get people more aware of some of these matters, and maybe a lot of the problems will just take care of themselves. We'll see. How do I spend my day? Inspections and follow-up of addresses, documentation, and documentation. photos, reports, violation letters, property information, any contact made with owners, follow-up notes, and more. Being a police officer before this position, that obviously was kind of where I got my start to knowing how important documentation was. Anybody can argue anything. And even though a lot of these city ordinances or a lot of these things may not be considered major, the fact is they're still a violation, and they could consist of legal action if nothing's changed. And so if that's the case, we need to cover our end, and we need to make sure everything's together, that the story's straight, and that we know the who, what, when, where, and why when I send the city attorney that code enforcement case summary that you see on the right-hand side of your screen. There was no certain template in place when I came into this. Again, using my experience of writing reports, I felt that that was what you're seeing as kind of the best example of how to move forward with addressing some of these matters. How do I also spend my day? Researching into city ordinances. Not everything is obvious. I've read a lot of city ordinances. In West Fargo's they got a pretty detailed one, to say the least. I've tried to look at other areas around us, such as Fargo, Moorhead, Grand Forks, a little bit of Sioux Falls, Minneapolis. I've tried to look into a little bit of it to see how ours compares to them. But when it's all said and done, West Fargo, we're our own town, our city. And so, we don't want to just assume that we want to be like everybody else. So contact with citizens and taking complaints and following up. Some people like to talk more than others. Some people want that phone call back after you've done an inspection on something. Others, when they make the complaint, they don't care if they get a call back. They just want somebody to know. Thing with a lot of these complainants is the majority of the complainants are people that would otherwise not complain. They've just been dealing with this issue for such an extended period of time that they finally realize that there's no other route to go. And they feel bad, but they also want something to change. Obviously, there's those, few and far between. There's people that will complain about a lot of things, and they're not necessarily wrong by complaining about it, but there's just people that do like to bring things up more than others, and they like their follow-up with me more than others. And then referring to other departments or supervisors for assistance based on issues. I spend a lot of time working with Tim in the planning department on issues and asking them questions, because ultimately they're the experts on some of the planning ordinance chapters. If I have questions related to streets or public works, I can refer to them as well. And obviously Mark in the building inspections department, he's a wealth of knowledge. And with that, I can ask him for any assistance on anything that might relate to businesses or buildings, I should say. So current issues with code enforcement are, I know in the summertime, getting accurate contact information for vacant lot owners when trying to enforce tall grass and noxious weeds. It's one thing with the house because you at least could post a fillable violation letter or a violation letter in general on that property. It's not as easy to do with a vacant lot. And a lot of these vacant lots, if I go and search who the property owner is, it comes back to an LLC or some kind of a corporation that doesn't really have like a consistent contact in place. So I have to go through multiple sources to try and get different addresses that might be associated with that owner to call them, maybe a phone number. It's gotten a lot better. My property contact information list has definitely increased over time, and I think that'll help things out. But there's always those occasional LLCs or companies that just aren't that common around here. Dedication to some more unknown violations while trying to keep up with numerous tall grass and weed complaints in the summer and snow and sidewalk complaints in the winter. So during the summer, I was busy with those complaints that sometimes when some other kind of complaints would come in that are like, that would require researching into ordinances or other departments. That got to be kind of tough because, you know, I want to make sure that I'm giving that ordinance or that complaint the time of day to see if that person's, you know, right or got a point or not. But it can be tough to kind of manage the large quantity of some of these common ones versus others that maybe take more time. I know we had some noise ordinance issues with the lights early on, and trying to figure out how we can, you know, enforce the noise ordinance, or how we can best, you know, please everybody. You know, it was an interesting way of trying to juggle that between some of these common ones. Answering the common defenses of, well, it's been like this forever, and all of a sudden I'm getting a letter now. I know in one case here, there's a property owner that's technically been in violation of something for 30 years. And at one point went to court in 1990 or early 90s, but nothing, it was let go then at that time. And then it was kind of forgotten about for a while. And now that we're, you know, here 30 years later, you know, the individual is reasonable about everything else except for that. And that's his reasoning, is because it's been like this forever, and he just doesn't see the need to change it at this point in time. And this example is not uncommon for other instances either. Some people have something parked outside and they've had it like that forever, and all of a sudden they're getting a violation letter now because somebody complained on them. But so trying to figure out how I can best explain it, that this is a newer position, I believe, as of 2016. And up until this year, it wasn't really that full time. And so now that it is full time, now that it is a growing city, you know, more things may have to get enforced. And, you know, just because it wasn't at one point doesn't mean that it shouldn't be now. And then efficiency and enforcement of certain issues or situations. For example, is this issue really worth taking to the city attorney for prosecution? Is it really worth the potential high costs that could come with abating it if we needed to down the road? Just things like that. You know, some take a long time, and, you know, one maybe will ask, are some of these matters worth it? So what is the goal for code enforcement in West Fargo? This is the slide that I feel I need the most help from commissioners and anybody else involved, just because I'm flexible. I maybe could have an opinion on either way. And I think there's good and bad with both sides of everything that I'm about to go over here. But it's just something to think about on how we want to move forward here. So, for example, flexibility versus swift action. You know, do we want to be flexible with these property owners that they're like, okay, I can't get it done by this compliance date, but I can get it done within the week after? Do we work with that? Or maybe it's a month after, because that does happen to be the case with some people. They're like, listen, I can't get this changed. I can't get this moved. Some people can't do it till like next spring. Or do we want to do swift action? If we're doing a parking on grass example, and that 30-day compliance period comes up, do we want to just say, hey, 30 days is up, we're sending to the city attorney, and sorry, there's nothing that we're going to be able to do. We can't give any breaks on this one because I'm not going to give a break to this other person. So things to think about. Do we want to be flexible, or do we want to just kind of put a stop on it right away? And then proactive versus reactive is probably my most important one that I'd like for us to consider. Right now, we are primarily reactive. I would say we are about 85% or more reactive to complaints. Or, you know, maybe I receive a complaint on a specific property. I do not only go to that property and write them a violation letter. If their neighbors or anybody on that reasonable distance around them is in violation, I believe that they need to be sent one too. I know that Fargo had some negative publicity this past winter for that reason, because they would get a complaint for snow on a sidewalk, but because they only gave it to that person and not the other properties in violation around them, that individual was rather upset, and understandable. We want to be consistent. Proactive. If I'm proactive, that basically means if I see something obvious, I would end up just writing a violation letter, whether there was a complaint or not. That proactivity could be limited during the summer when the number of complaints is high for the tall grass and weeds, or the winter when there's a lot of snow complaints. But otherwise, there are periods of time when it may be slower than others, and proactivity is certainly an option. Otherwise, if we just want to kind of stick to that reactive approach and just say, hey, let's only do it if people are going to complain about it. We don't need to control everything that people do. That's an option as well. And then the third point here could be, do we do citations? Do we do court? Do we do city commission hearings, which would be the civil portion? And the next slide is based on that. Or do we do nothing? Like I mentioned earlier, I do not have the capability at this point in time to issue citations. We don't really have anything in the ordinances that allow for, like a $50 or $100 fine if that's what we would end up doing. Most of the cases, other than tall grass and weeds and snow on sidewalks, and ends up getting sent to the city attorney, and from there she can decide what she wants to do with it. Otherwise, another option is those city commission hearings, where maybe we allow a certain period of time to give the property owner heads up of a commission hearing, where at the commission hearing we can present the case to the commission, and they can decide whether we will, as the city, abate the nuisance or not. Nothing as an approach. I'm trying to be as neutral as I can be on this, but I don't know that nothing is a good answer to this, just because I've already seen cases where people kind of have seen that enforcement isn't guaranteed on some matters. So I just don't know that that's the best route to go. Lastly, do we do case-by-case basis, or do we do uniform punishment? It's pretty similar to the top point there. Do we kind of treat these as a case-by-case basis based on the person's life situation? If that property owner is making an attempt to change it, but isn't maybe going to reach that compliance deadline, do I just allow that person a little bit more flexibility than the other person? Or do we just have uniform punishment? And I guess the case-by-case basis portion is also like, okay, this person's going to get a fine, but this person's not going to get a fine. They'll just go to the city attorney. So do we do that on a case-by-case basis, or do we do a uniform punishment where everybody that's in violation goes to court, or some people can receive a citation, some people go to court? How do we move forward on some of these matters? So when we get to the discussion portion, I'm hoping that we can have some good talk about some of these points here. Public nuisance civil remedy. I just put this on here because it is an option under the public nuisance section of chapter 15. So like example, compliance is not reached. Let's say it's junk. Some person's got a lot of junk on their property and they have not reached their compliance date. The notice is sent to, in this case, if we wanted to go this route with the city commission, we would do a notice sent to the violator of a hearing of a city commission meeting. They must receive a 5 days written notice. And at that meeting, the commission would determine yes or no as far as whether we as the city should abate the nuisance. And of course, the property owner, if they choose, would get an opportunity to speak on their behalf too. And obviously, and if the city abates the nuisance, then those costs shall be assessed against the property owner. And Sarah can let us know if I missed anything on this, just because I tend to ask her a lot of questions relating to this stuff, and she would be the expert in this matter. So if I missed anything, feel free to speak up later on. So how to better enforce these issues? Are possible ordinance changes needed? That's something we could certainly ask ourselves. I don't know personally. I don't know how often we review city ordinances. Do we do it on an annual basis? Do we just do it as problems arise or possible changes need to come up? How can we maybe look at these ordinances and see to write them better so that we can help ourselves out to enforce some of these matters, and not maybe spend so much money getting to that point. Do we do citations before we send to the attorney? Do we only do citations? Obviously, if you get pulled over for speeding, you generally will get a citation for speeding. Is that something that we consider for someone that hasn't reached a compliant state? I don't know. The time some cases consume is unfeasible. I mean, there's been some cases that I've probably spent months on, and it's not necessarily because it wasn't worth sending to the city attorney, but because it was maybe a mixture of me trying to be reasonable with that person because they were going to try, but then they ended up not trying, or maybe they fixed an issue originally, but then they let it go right back to how it was, and we kind of had to restart. There's some issues or some properties that are just unfeasible with how things are written, but you also have to consider photos taken, follow-up calls, sending violation letters, researching certain ordinances if not a common issue. So, is more manpower needed? That would probably be a question that we would ask depending on how we want to move forward with certain things, or if there's more things we'd want to do, like a rental housing inspection program someday, or other things that we specifically think, hey, West Fargo, we need to focus on this. Or do we just do more assistance from other departments around the city, and how we can kind of share information with each other and make some of this stuff go away a little bit easier? Awareness to the communications department. This has kind of already been started through conversations with Melissa and her staff, such as the snow on a public sidewalk matter. I know they already put something on social media a while ago, just to kind of give people a heads up, like, hey, make sure you get your sidewalk shoveled within a 48-hour period of time. Maybe we look at using them more, as social media is always an increasing way of getting a hold of people. And then my questions at the end there are, how do we handle cases which continue to have no punishment despite continually not abiding by city ordinances? And then how do we give an explanation to that complainant as to why it is not being fixed? That's a tough one. Again, there are some things that when it's all said and done, some of these things are just not that big of a deal when we have a lot of bigger problems in our world. But at the same time, they are maybe a violation of a city ordinance. They are annoying to somebody, and it can be frustrating to not have a good answer to give a complainant. We want people to enjoy where they live. We don't want people's property values to be brought down because their neighbor just can't seem to follow any of the ordinances, or just has stopped caring about their property. That's what code enforcement's for. We can't really determine how beautiful a place looks, because that varies by somebody's opinion, but we also want to try and keep it so that we don't let certain places go. We want to keep our city held to a high standard. And I think West Fargo is relatively good in that regard compared to maybe other areas in the near region. But I do think West Fargo, we have a lot of good stuff, and those complaints shouldn't be taken as a bad thing. Those are just people that care about the properties around them and want some things to get fixed. But ultimately, as we have these new developments coming in, we want to make sure that we kind of have a plan in place, because as population grows, so will the problems. At this point, that is all I have. Tim or anybody, feel free to step in if you feel like I missed anything throughout that presentation. Otherwise, I am happy to take some comments or questions, and we can start our discussion.
Thanks, Travis. I was asking if anybody knows how to get the video back on. Travis, I think as the host, if you wanted to, you could probably go under the participants and click on the screen and turn their just press on the camera and it'll open that up. I might be wrong about that, but
yeah, when I go over the, let's see here. Yeah, whenever I go over the camera, it just goes to a more option, and it does not allow me to. It doesn't have an option, I should say. So unless is there anything else that might be an option to change?
So under more, it doesn't give you the ability to turn them on?
Negative. It just has chat, make host, change role to attendee, and a couple other things that don't have anything to do with it.
I'd say just open it up for conversation and any feedback that you might have.
Sounds good. All right. Does anybody, whether it be Sarah or the city commissioners, does anybody want to start or have any comments?
This is Commissioner George. I have a couple of comments and questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so first of all, I thought this was a fantastic presentation, tons of great information. I want to say that as a commissioner, we're part of making these ordinances and voting on these ordinances, but it's never our job to enforce them. The same with complaints. When we get calls, it's really easy to want to jump in and try and do something. But we need to be contacting staff, and you and the police department to take care of that. That's not our job to go to a home or a business and trying to enforce that. We're not, trained for that. That's not what we do. So I think that's important to see what you do in code enforcement and how that process works. I also wondered, with your position, are you your own department or are you part of the police department?
So I fall under Tim in the planning and zoning department. Okay. At this point in time, I am kind of my own thing, I guess you could say, department. But basically with that, I'm just, depending on the issue at hand, I just work with the department heads as needed. And ideally, I would like to maybe make a little more of a proactive approach in communicating with the police department as I move forward here.
Okay, perfect. And then you had brought up a list of some other items as far as flexibility, case by case. My personal opinion was I'd usually vote for flexibility in a situation and kind of taking things case by case, because like you had listed before, you don't really know what a person's personal situation is. Did they get sick? Are they on vacation? Did they fall down and break an arm and now they can't shovel for a couple of weeks and didn't make arrangements? What those situations are. So I think especially if it's like a first or second time violation, to education, warning, that kind of thing would be my opinion. But of course, if it's a recurring issue and it's happening over and over and over, then maybe more of a swift action, harder penalty would be appropriate in that situation. So I'm also wondering, how often have you seen these things take care of themselves with just a warning versus how often do they actually go as far as court situations?
The overwhelming majority, the problems fix themselves. But that being said, I would say I have gone well beyond the compliance requirements that have been needed. So sometimes, especially with parking issues, sometimes the problem was fixed, but it took about 60 days to get there versus 30. It's just one of those things where, and that's why I kind of wanted to have this meeting, is I guess personally, I'm okay with whatever route we go, but I just don't know efficiency wise, and maybe Sarah can kind of speak on this, but sending it to her for some of these cases, when she's got plenty to take care of for the police department side of things, and some of those I guess you could say true crimes or B misdemeanors. I just don't know how efficient it is to send some of these cases there. So at this point in time, most of them have fixed themselves, But if we were to stay pretty true to the compliance deadlines, I think we would find that a lot of people would probably not be reaching it.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess my last thing is talking about communication and using Melissa in our communications department. That would be, I'd be absolutely huge in that communication, education. And especially with, as the seasons change, the most common ones that you see, the clearing of the sidewalks in the winter, whether that's on social media, the radio, the newspaper, whatever, really getting that out there. Same thing with sump pump situations, whatever the season, brings, just really getting that information out there as much as possible. I definitely support. So I guess that's everything I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Jurdovic, can you hear me okay, Travis?
Yes, I can.
So, the one thought I had that I think it was a question you asked about being, either proactive or reactive. Mm-hmm. And, I will say that the one thing I don't like about it having to be complaint driven is that we are pushing, a person's neighbors into tattling on their neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Even I've been personally in a position before where, I might know my neighbor, I might be friends with my neighbor. There's something they're doing that is totally wrong. It's something I would like to fix, but do I really want to file a complaint mm-hmm. on my neighbor? And I feel like being a complaint-driven system, we're actually putting a lot of people into really weird positions that way versus being proactive, where the city's taking more of the leadership role with that. And there's even scenarios, this summer I did a lot of walking and there's a few parks I walked by where there were pools that didn't have the proper fencing around it. And who's going to really file a complaint on that? But it's a big issue from a safety perspective.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's, just I guess more of a thought than anything, is that I wonder if, that's really the model we should have, or if we should be being more proactive.
And, that's again why I post it, because, I keep thinking about it. Obviously, as being it's just me, obviously proactivity only means so much, because, I would only be able to probably do it as so much possible. But the thing is like you kind of mentioned there, with people having to complain on their neighbors, a lot of the times when I kind of pose the question to complainants, just to kind of get an idea on how to approach the situation, I'll ask them, did you happen to, reach out to your neighbor, before this or at any point? And most people I talk to have said that they don't feel comfortable talking to their neighbor, or maybe they've already had a bad experience and they just don't feel safe to do it. With that being said, and I give people this kind of heads up too, because it is true. The majority of people that receive violation letters tend to assume it's because of a neighbor anyway. A lot of people will ask the question, who made the complaint? I do not give that information out. I try not to even give them any idea if it was a person in the area or not, but it is something that comes up.
And so the whole process is kind of designed to almost kind of, instead of, eliminating issues between neighbors throughout town, we're actually potentially making it worse.
Mm-hmm.
This is Commissioner George. I would agree with everything Commissioner Jurdovic just said. I'm being proactive as much as possible. If, our law enforcement officers are out driving around and they see sidewalks uncleared or junk in the yard or noxious weeds, getting that education letter out ahead of time versus tattling on your neighbor. I agree with that completely.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
This is Brad Olson. How many people would you need to be on staff to be proactive?
At this point, I'm not 100% sure. I truly think that depending on how things, I think it'd be good to just kind of see how it goes with just me at this point in time. My thought is one extra body would be a good option. I don't know that we need any more than that. I think 2 people can get a lot done in this type of position, because the way we got to look at it too is that there are some periods that just aren't quite as busy as others. And it would be nice though during the busy periods to have that second person to also be able to help step up and do it. Plus, and this is, not really a big deal, because I mean, everybody takes vacation time or anything like that during, with a job. But if there is one frustrating thing on this end, if I, just being honest, if I were to take vacation for like 2 days of vacation, that's 2 days that people are calling in complaints, and I'm not there to answer it. And while yes, somebody could be designated, throughout planning or building department to maybe answer those questions, just to have a second person there to kind of keep somebody consistently on during the day, each day, would be great. And regardless, the military leave part, I can't necessarily help. But like last year, we had a few instances where with all that was going on, I got activated 3 times. And on top of my annual training, it was tough because, I was the one that takes these complaints, but now I'm gone for that time period. And so when I get back, all I'm doing is playing catch up. There's no way I could be proactive. So that's really, I guess, all I would comment on that regard.
Travis, this is Bernie.
Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. Very well done. Your attention to the detail of delineating the types of complaints by month, I think is huge for the commission to see that first and foremost, and or Tim Solberg as your supervisor. My first comment would be that if you and Tim have recommendations to the commission with regard to ordinance changes or tweaking some of the time periods, if you will, I think that the commission would openly receive those suggestions, and we'd certainly work with you on that. The other thing is on the staffing thing, that too, through Tim and yourself. First of all, we want to thank you for your service to the National Guard. That's top rate. We're very proud of you for that.
Thank you.
One of the other thing, I took a lot of notes, so forgive me if I'm going to talk for a while here. Your parking placement on the grass, I find that unconscionable that these people are doing that multiple times. And like you say, they come home at night, they drive up on the grass, go to work in the morning, drive. So I would like to suggest, and of course, Sarah and others would be better versed in this than I, but if they have more than 3 in a given period, in 6 months or whatever, then it's a different action. I don't think that that's fair to their neighbors. Of course, driving over the boulevards is an ordinance in itself. So I think if there's multiples within a designated period of time that you and Tim would arrive at, I think that we ought to have a second type of action that takes place. The other question I had on parking, can you estimate how many of those complaints took place when the city put no parking signs on sides of the street, that type of thing?
Not really, but if I do remember right, I think I had a couple people that brought it up and kind of made the comment that they had nowhere else to park their vehicle. So it was only a handful. I don't think I've gotten very many.
I know that some of us commissioners all received calls on that. I had 4 or 5 myself. Let's see. A question for Tim here and Travis, but is there any way when we have noise complaints that come directly to Travis that we can identify them if it's in the entertainment districts, Tim?
Yeah, we have a noise ordinance, and Travis has not gotten too familiar with that yet, but he's learning. Prairie Heights was always the one that got the most complaints. Travis, you've had a few on on the lights, correct?
Mhm. Yes.
I'd like, if you could have a separate line item on that, you know, is it the sound, is it the lights, whatever. I think that that's something that as we continue to move forward with these venues and the offerings we're going to have there, I think that that would be very helpful to us on the commission and certainly to the board members on West Fargo events. If you'd consider that. I love the idea, and obviously Commissioner George stated it very articulately about the city website, social medias, all of those things when it comes to snow, weeds, you know, those things that because we're now on a lot of these neighborhood platforms. You know, they have, for all these different neighborhoods now have newsletters. And Melissa, I think, has access to all of those. And I think that suggestion by Commissioner George would be time well spent on updating that, having Addie do that. I guess that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts?
This is Melissa. I just wanted to comment on the communications piece and note that that's absolutely something that we can work into the schedule. And Travis has actually been very proactive in working with us and reaching out and trying to figure out what those topics are and what that schedule looks like. And so we're excited to continue to partner with him.
Sarah, did you by chance have any comments or anything that you wanted to mention on how it maybe affects you as one of the city attorneys?
Well, I guess as far as, you know, I think the better option is to have Travis continue kind of how he has been and working with the property owner. It's nice to say you could put something in black and white as the rule, but there's always exceptions. And it seems even more so in this type of area with these nuisance violations. I mean, especially some of the large junk accumulations and some of those, a lot of times there's a lot of history there. It's accumulated, you know, over a long period of time. It's not something that you would ever expect they could take care of in a week or longer, a little bit longer. So I think the way Travis has been doing it is almost how you have to do it. I don't think it would serve anybody's purpose to just come to a date and automatically send it to me to bring to the court, because then basically what happens is they come to court and explain their situation. And, you know, our ultimate goal in court in these situations is to have them remedy the problem. Otherwise, you know, they can plead guilty and we can give them a fine, but the problem is still there. And so we have not solved anything. So allowing Travis to work with the owner as much as he can, I think, is the best scenario. I mean, obviously, if they're not complying and not making any progress, then sometimes sending it to court and people getting a citation into court or a summons into court sometimes kickstarts them a little more than just talking to Travis. And oftentimes we can get them to comply. It takes a while, but then there's still some that never do. And so, you know, they get their fine in court, but the problem is still there. So, I mean, I don't have a problem prosecuting these in court. I just don't know that it's the best method. So I think the ideal options probably are Travis continuing to do what he's going to do, or, you know, the civil remedy of having the abatement, but that brings it back to the commission. And I guess I'm not sure what the commission's thoughts are on those in order for the city to abate it. And that is probably more of a case-by-case basis also, if it's, you know, something that's been receiving a lot of complaints, or if it's some sort of, you know, bordering on a health hazard or something like that. Maybe that would be a situation where we would pursue a civil remedy. I guess I would probably look towards the commissioners to see their opinion on that. But the criminal side, you know, we can give them a fine, but that's really about it. You know, I guess we hope that the threat of fines for, you know, we can charge them multiple violations, depending on how long, you know, they've been in violation. But, you know, if the threat of a fine doesn't get them to do it, there's not much more that we can do on the criminal side.
I certainly agree with Sarah, Travis, on what you're doing now. Commissioner Jurdevig and Commissioner George also mentioned it too, that on a case-by-case basis. But at the same time, if we have those constant repeat offenders, that's why I'm asking you and Tim, who have, you know, the most working knowledge with this, to make recommendations to us as to some tweaks that might, you know, increase that compliance percentage a little more, you know. And I do like the fact that you don't use the form letter from the software and you personalize them more. I think that that's probably why you're getting about 85% compliance, you know. I think that that's a positive thing. And that's the message that the city of West Fargo wants to send, is what we want to work with you. I have it, you know, on times when I've gotten complaints about junk, and I know that the other commissioners have done this too. You know, we jump in our vehicle and we drive to the site and we look at it. And, you know, as I wouldn't want to observe that on a daily basis or a regular basis. And because the accumulation is just overwhelming, you know. And so I do think that we owe it to some of the neighbors to try and do everything that we can to help police that up. But as a number of people have said, you know, that mess has been there for 20 years, for crying out loud. So but I am certainly open to your suggestions with your expertise and dealing with this on a daily basis. And of course, Mr. Solberg too. So I would highly encourage you to make some recommendations, and we'd welcome you to a city commission meeting to discuss that at a public forum.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that there's nothing wrong with continuing the way that it has been going. You know, some people are trying to make it work, but some people, I know based on experience, are just not going to make those changes. So I know I feel comfortable making that decision on which ones truly should be sent to the city attorney and which ones shouldn't be, because ultimately I know I have nothing to gain by sending every single case to the city attorney. It just doesn't make sense. I just feel like that is the message for you. I want everybody to gets these letters. I personally wish that they would all call me so I could let them know don't worry, it's not that big of a deal, but we need you to work with us and we need you to work with your neighbors. And a lot of times I've had some pretty good conversations with people, and I know they generally appreciate the flexibility more than the ones that are, you know, going to get sent to court right away. Because when I first started, I wasn't planning on giving those flexibility periods, and I could tell that there was a little bit more negativity as a result. So I think that is a good plan.
Attorney, one of the things that we always got to remember too is the people that we're giving the flexibility to, oftentimes on the other side of it, there's people that are complaining that are fed up with the flexibility. So it is a little bit of a rope you got to walk.
Yes.
I do want to make a mention that I think what we'll probably end up doing is putting together somewhat of a policy for how we deal with this and present that in a more brief discussion at City Commission, and maybe ask for action on that policy at some time.
I think that'd be great. Absolute great.
I have just a quick question on some wording. Could either Travis or Sarah explain to me when they say that the city would abate the violation, just explain that a little bit more clearly as far as what that means?
If it's junk, you know, we're probably paying somebody to clean it up, whoever it might be. Just like if somebody doesn't mow their grass, the contractor that we have through our RFP is basically, they'll abate it, which means they're just mowing it for us, and then we just charge it right back to the property owner.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, Travis, along that line, if we've got these properties with all the junk on it, why don't we be as swift on the, on abating it and getting cleaned up as we do with the snow removal and the long grass, the tall grass? What's our history? Have we just been more lenient with the people with the junk, and we're more proactive on the snow and the weed issue rather than seeing that eyesore of, 10, 15 cars on a lot?
I'm not 100% sure on the history behind it, but is all I'll say is when it comes to the snow on the sidewalk thing, I can understand that one because it can technically be a safety issue, and I think that one's an important one to do more immediately. I know our snow and our grass ordinances are very similar to the cities around us. I would argue that ours is almost more flexible than some of the cities around us. As far as like the junk, I don't know what made it that way. Technically, the public nuisance ordinance, which is where the junk ordinance falls under, it basically states in the punishment portion that we really only need to give no less than 48 hours as a time frame for compliance. But ultimately, it's just not reasonable. It really isn't. Because some of the ones that I've dealt with are honestly so bad that, I'm pretty much know by sending them a 30-day notice that we're basically setting them up for failure there. But at the same time, we don't want to give them too much rope. So I guess, and those are the ones that I've been going back and forth with, throughout my time so far, is like, how can we better enforce these? And honestly, I've thought of things, and then the next day I think, nope, nah, that was a bad idea kind of deal. So I'm still thinking about what's the best route to go. But I did forget to use that example because you and I had spoke not so long ago, because you had received a complaint from a citizen regarding a property with junk vehicles. And I had told you that that was a case that started before I even started working for West Fargo. And that's exactly why I was bringing up the civil hearings through the city commission in the presentation, was because that might be a property where after all this time and nothing's really changed, they've already pleaded guilty in court. So at this point, maybe all we have left is to bring it to the city commission and have you guys approve it, and we can basically just tow the vehicles away.
Right.
Travis, if I could just chime in
Yes.
to sort of go back to the question of why the junk is just a little bit different from the snow and the mowing. According to the ordinances for the junk, we can give them a rather quick deadline if they fail to comply. However, we have to basically give them an opportunity to be heard before the city commission, and we have to send them notice of that at least 5 days before the hearing. And so the difference there is mainly because if we go in and abate one of these junk ordinances as opposed to just snow removal, we are taking their property. So before we do that, we have to give them the opportunity to basically plead their case to the commission. And at that hearing, it's not a public hearing. It's just the opportunity for the property owner or somebody with interest in the property to speak. So it's nothing that has to be published in the paper or anything like that. But they could get the opportunity at least to come and tell the commissioners why they have not yet complied with the notice that Travis would send. And then you have the opportunity to listen to what they have to say. And then you have a little bit of discretion. You can decide, nope, you haven't done anything. We're going to order city staff to take care of this and you're going to be charged. You can extend the deadline. I mean, or you can decide to do nothing. And I don't know if that hearing portion is what deterred this from going to the commission long ago. I guess I'm not really sure on the history of that, and maybe Tim knows. But for whatever reason, that avenue hasn't really been pursued. But for some of these junk properties, that might be the only avenue that would actually clean up the property. But I guess that's the kind of the answer why it's not quite as quick as the snow and the mowing.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any history on why we've never done that, but have no knowledge of us ever using that process.
That might be something we want to tinker with our ordinance if you feel it's worth it. I'll leave that up to you, Travis and Tim here to figure out as something that we need to look at. I don't know how many we have like that, but
Part of it I don't like so much when I have looked at it is, for instance, when we do the Board of Adjustment, we can deal on facts. It's very simple to take the opinion and the politics out of it. When we do something like this, a hearing like this, I'm a little nervous about putting you guys in a position to deal on a matter like this because it becomes public, emotional, harder to present, so.
Right, and maybe, I guess, this would be the last resort, kind of like Travis was talking about with the property that received multiple notices, has been convicted in court, and there's still no movement. I mean, maybe that would be the situation, and there's probably not that many that would end up coming before the commission if that was the case. Of course, that wouldn't alleviate the problem quickly, but at least it would take out all of the other avenues before doing that, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that could be worked into the policy when you guys start writing that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else from anybody as far as any comments or questions?
We are available for questions via email, and we'll work on some policy stuff and bring it forward. I appreciate all the patience you guys had today and attentive listening to Travis. It's a complicated job. He's doing a great job.
Thank you, Travis.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for listening today. I really appreciated it. I've been wanting to do this for a little while now, and it means a lot to me. So yeah, like you said, feel free to reach out to email or call me, whatever you got. And it's going to be a learning experience, and honestly, it'll always probably be an ever evolving thing here. So we'll see what 2021 can bring here. But if there's nothing else, I will close this meeting here.